Today is February 23rd, 2011. Today's reading is from Terry Pratchett's The Monstrous Regiment. Polly lay in the dark on a bed of musty straw. There was no question of anyone getting undressed. The rain hammered on the roof and the wind blew through a crack under the door, despite Igor's effort to stuff it with straw. There was some desultory conversation, during which Polly found that she was sharing the dank shed with Tonker, Halter, Shifty Manacle, Wazzer Goom, and Lofty Toot. Maledict and Igor didn't seem to have acquired repeatable nicknames. She'd become Ozzer by general agreement. Slightly to Polly's surprise, the boy now known as Wazzer had taken a small picture of the Duchess out of his pack and nervously hung it on the wall on an old nail. No one else said anything as he prayed to it. It was what you were supposed to do. They said the Duchess was dead. Polly had been washing up when she'd heard the men talking late one night, and it's a poor woman who can't eavesdrop while making a noise at the same time. Dead, they said, but the people up at Prince Marmaduke Pitois Albert Hans Joseph Bernhardt Wilhelmsburg weren't admitting it. That was 'cause with there being no children, and with royalty marrying one another's cousins and grannies all the time, the ducal throne would go to the Prince Heinrich of Slovenia. There, can you believe that? That's why we never see her, right? And there hasn't been a new picture all these years. Make you think, eh? Oh, they say she's been on mourning 'cause of the young duke, but that was more'n 70 years ago. They say she was buried in secret, and... At which point her father had stopped the speaker dead. There are some conversations where you don't even want people to remember you were in the same room. Dead or alive, the Duchess watched over you. The recruits tried to sleep. Occasionally someone belched or expelled wind noisily, and Polly responded with a few fake eructations of her own. That seemed to inspire greater effort on the part of the other sleepers, to the point where the roof rattled and dust fell down before everyone subsided. Once or twice she heard people stagger out into the windy darkness, in theory for the privy, but probably, given male impatience in these matters, to aim much closer to home. Once, coasting in and out of a troubled dream, she thought she heard someone sobbing. Taking care not to rustle too much, Polly pulled out of the much-folded, much-read, much-stained last letter from her brother, and read it by the light of the solitary, guttering candle. It had been opened and heavily mangled by the censors, and bore the stamp of the duchy. It read, "Dear all, we are in, which is, with a, big thing with knobs. On we with, which is just as well because, out of, I am keeping well, the food is, wheel at the, but my mate, says not to worry. It'll be all over by, and we shall all have medals. Chins up, Paul." It was in a careful hand, the excessively clear and well-shaped writing of someone who had to think about every letter. She folded it up again. Paul had wanted medals because they were shiny. That had been almost a year ago, when any recruiting party that came past went away with the best part of a battalion, and there had been people waving them off with flags and music. Sometimes, now, smaller parties of men came back. The lucky ones were only missing an arm or one leg. There were no flags. She unfolded the other piece of paper. It was a pamphlet. It was headed, "From the Mothers of Bargravia." The Mothers of Bargravia were very definite about wanting to send their sons off to war against the Slovenian aggressor, and used a great many exclamation points to say so. And this was odd, because the mothers in the town had not seemed keen on the idea of their sons going off to war, and positively tried to drag them back. Several copies of the pamphlet seemed to have reached every home. Even so, it was very patriotic. That is, it talked about killing foreigners. She'd learned to read and write after a fashion, because the inn was big and it was a business and things had to be tallied and recorded. Her mother had taught her to read, which was acceptable to Nugan, and her father made sure that she learned how to write, which was not. A woman who could write was an abomination unto Nugan, according to Father Jupe. Anything she wrote would by definition be a lie. But Polly had learned anyway, because Paul hadn't, at least to the standard needed to run an inn as busy as the Duchess. He could read if he could run his fingers slowly along the lines, and he wrote letters painfully, with a lot of care and heavy breathing, like a man assembling a piece of jewelry. He was big and kind and slow, and could lift beer kegs as though they were toys. But he wasn't a man at home with paperwork. Their father had hinted to Polly, very gently but very often, that Polly would need to be right behind him when the time came for him to run the Duchess. Left to himself, with no one else to tell him what to do, her brother stood back and watched birds. At Paul's insistence, she read the whole of From the Mothers of Barogravia to him, including the bits about heroes and there being no greater good than to die for your country. She wished now she hadn't done that. Paul did what he was told. Unfortunately, he believed what he was told, too. She put the papers away and dozed again, until her bladder woke her up. Oh well, at least this time of the morning she'd have a clear run. She reached out for her pack and stepped as softly as she could out into the rain. It was mostly just coming off the trees now, which were roaring in the wind that blew up the valley. The moon was hidden in the clouds, but there was just enough light to make out the inn's buildings. A certain grayness suggested that what passed for dawn and plun was on the way. She located the men's privy, which indeed stank of inaccuracy. A lot of planning and practice had gone into this moment. She was helped by the design of her breeches, which were the old-fashioned kind, with generous buttoned trapdoors, and also by the experiment she'd made very early in the mornings when she was doing the cleaning. In short, with care and attention to detail, she'd found that a woman could pee standing up. It certainly worked back home in the inn's privy, which had been designed and built with the certain expectation of the aimlessness of the customers. The wind shook the dank building. In the dark, she thought of Auntie Hattie, who'd gone a bit strange around her 60th birthday and persistently accused passing young men of looking up her dress. She was even worse after a glass of wine, and she had one joke. What does a man do? What does a man stand up to do, a woman sit down to do, and a dog lift its leg to do? And then, when everyone was too embarrassed to answer, she'd triumphantly shriek, "Shake hands!" and fall over. Auntie Hattie was an abomination all by herself. Polly buttoned up the breeches with a sense of exhilaration. She felt she'd crossed a bridge, a sensation that was helped by the realization that she'd kept her feet dry. Someone said, "Psst." It was just as well. She'd already taken a leak. Panic instantly squeezed every muscle. Where were they hiding? This was just a rotten old shed. Oh, there were a few cubicles, but the smell alone suggested very strongly that the woods outside would be a much better proposition, even on a wild night, even with extra wolves. "Yes," she quavered, and then cleared her throat and demanded, with a little more gruffness, "Yes?" "You'd need these," whispered the voice. In the fetid gloom, she made out something rising over the top of the cubicle. She reached up nervously and touched softness. It was a bundle of wool. Her fingers explored it. "A pair of socks," she said. "Right. Wear 'em," said the mystery voice very hoarsely. "Thank you, but I've brought several pairs," Polly began. There was a faint sigh. "No, not on your feet. Shove 'em down the front of your trousers." "What do you mean?" "Look," said the whisperer patiently. "You don't bulge where you shouldn't bulge. That's good. But you don't bulge where you should bulge, either. You know, lower down." "Oh, but I didn't think people noticed," said Polly, glowing with embarrassment. She had been spotted, but there was no hue and cry, no angry quotations from the Book of Nugan. Someone was helping. Someone had seen her. "It's a funny thing," said the voice, "but they notice what's missing more than they notice what's there. Just one pair, mark you. Don't get ambitious." Polly hesitated. Is it obvious?" she said. "No, that's why I gave you the socks." "I meant that I'm not... "Not really," said the voice in the dark. "You're pretty good. You come over as a frightened young lad trying to look big and brave. You might pick your nose a bit more often, just a tip. Few things interest a young man more than the contents of his nostrils. Now I've got a favor to ask of you in return." "I didn't ask you for one," Polly thought, quite annoyed at being taken for being a frightened young lad, when she was sure she'd come over as quite a cool, non-ruffled young man. But she said calmly, "What is it? Got any paper?" Wordlessly, Polly pulled from the Mothers of Barogravia out of her shirt and handed it up. She heard the sound of a match striking and a sulphurous smell that only improved the general conditions. "Why is this the escutcheon of Her Grace the Duchess I see in front of me?" said the whisperer. "Well, it won't be in front of me for long. Beat it, boy." Polly hurried out into the night, shocked, dazed, confused, and almost asphyxiated, and made it to the shed door, but she'd barely shut it behind her and was blinking in the blackness when it was thrust open again to let the wind rain and Corporal Strappy.